All right, and Sarah and Chief, does everyone have the ability to mute and unmute themselves? Okay.
They do.
Good deal. Well, in the interest of time, we can probably get started. First, let me welcome everyone. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to participate in this session. This is our kind of first joint talent pipeline management and talent finance meeting. We're going to explain just how intimately connected these two initiatives are a little bit later. But we did want to make sure that our talent pipeline management network had access to more information about talent finance and what we hope to do with it next and how you all could be part of it. So we've kind of teased talent finance for the better part of a year. I know many of you had participated in our event series or had an opportunity to look at our white paper that came out on the topic in September. Some of you may have heard about talent finance through our fall webinar that we conducted, as well as our annual summit. So we've been talking about it, but it's largely been the highlights. And what we're going to hope to do today is once again give you those highlights so we all have a baseline about what talent finance is, but dive a little bit deeper into its relationship to TPM. And then the rest of the session is going to be interactive. But before I kind of show you the lay of land as far as the agenda goes, I wanted to introduce the team that is with you here today. On the TPM side, I'm joined by Nikki Da Silva and Jamie Francis. I'm sure many of you know that Jamie has made her return to the Chamber Foundation, and she has joined us today. And we also have Chief Etheridge and Sarah Castro, who are part of our talent finance team. And we're also joined, I believe, by Joseph Davis, our communications director. I know Cheryl Oldham, our senior VP, was hoping to listen in on today's session, so hopefully she'll have a chance to join us. And we are also joined by a number of other folks. We have Bob Sheets and Peter Beard, who you all know from TPM, but who are also my co-authors on talent finance. And we're also joined by Sarah Miller from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And her colleague, Stuart Andreasen, may be joining us a little bit later. And both Sarah and Stuart are collaborators with Bob, Peter, and I on talent finance, and all co-authored the white paper that came out this year. We are also joined, at least via audio, by Working Nation. I'll call out Jay Notes, who's listening in, who's been representing the Working Nation team as part of the Talent Finance Initiative. And I think that just about covers all the Talent Finance and TPM kind of consultant team and staff, so to speak. So if I missed anyone, please do speak up. But this is going to be a fairly casual meeting. And while I'm going to drive the majority of the presentation, I am going to periodically stop to ask any of our staff or consultants to kind of weigh in or add any additional commentary that they have for all of you. So if you hear these folks pipe up here and there, that's what they've been asked to do. And they're there to give you additional points of consideration, as well as to give you other things to think about, other examples to consider as we think about how to implement talent finance as part of TPM. If we can, what I'm going to ask all of you as I'm going over the agenda for today is if you have not had an opportunity to, please do use the group chat function. And we encourage you to introduce yourself. As you can see, we have over 40 people on this call. So we don't want to go around the horn, but instead we encourage you to use that chat feature to introduce yourself to your peers. And feel free to not only tell us who you are and where you're from, but if you're part of one of our TPM cohorts and can remember which one it was, we encourage you to share that information as well, so we can see the kind of rough distribution of folks we have across the many cohorts that have been convened across the years. And also encourage our team of staff and consultants to engage with the network in a group conversation in the chat while I drive the presentation. This is a relatively small meeting as far as remote meetings go, and we wanted to make sure this one was kept more casual. So we encourage you to chime in early and often. Please do use the chat box, and if something pops up there that should cause us to pause the presentation or for me to acknowledge, I encourage Sarah or anyone else from our team, Nikki, to jump in and interrupt, or just feel free to unmute yourself and make me stop talking. That would be welcome as well. So yeah, let's make this as conversational as possible, because the reason we're having this meeting in large part is, while we say it's to give you information, it's really for us to get a sense from you about where we should potentially be putting our efforts next year and how we could best engage you as kind of a joint TPM talent finance approach. So let's go to the next slide. We'll quickly share with you the agenda. I'm going to run through a very quick presentation of talent finance. Hopefully most of you have already heard about or seen a version of it, so I will not belabor it, but I will make sure we have a baseline and give you just a little refresher on what it's all about and what we've done to date. And then we're going to transition to a fun section, which is we're going to poll the TPM network. And we're going to have a series of polls that we're going to ask, and we're going to go through each one by one. I will walk you through the questions in the polls and the types of responses that are available to you. And then we're going to look at the results. And this is us trying to get a sense from you all on where you're at with thinking about talent finance and what's resonating with you and how you might use it to the extent that you're considering using it. And then this is just a kind of a straw poll. We're just getting a sense of where the network's at, this particular group, to help facilitate a discussion. And then, and we know a lot of this, you're going to be reacting to questions you're going to see for the first time. So don't worry, nothing is concrete. This is just to get a sense from all of you of how you're thinking about it now, knowing that you're going to be potentially thinking about it more later, which is where we get to the design workshop interest form. So if the poll was of interest to you and helped structure your thinking about how you too might participate in talent finance as part of the TPM network, we're going to give you an opportunity to go back and actually complete a more formal design workshop interest form. And I'll explain to you what it is. We'll walk you through it. It's largely a regurgitation of the polling questions, but would allow you to add a little bit more information about who you are and your partners, not locking you into anything. It's just asks you to go one step further than attending this meeting. It says, would you be willing to put your name on paper? So to the extent we organize additional meetings or this design workshop, which I'll explain later in the presentation, we know to contact you. We have you on our short list to receive that invitation. You're under no obligation. It's just a way to help organize your thinking and let us know that you're thinking about it, and that if we're looking for partners, that you'd at least like to be on our short list. And then with whatever time we have remaining, we'll open it up for an open forum, and we'll have as much discussion as we can fit into the time period we have. But if we aren't seeing a lot of conversation, we're also happy to give you back some time. So that's the lay of the land for the day. We'll try to move expeditiously through this agenda. And we'll be sharing all of our contact information with you at the end, or at least a majority of the contact information. I'm not sure if we got everyone on there, but we'll make sure you know who to talk to should you be interested in continuing the conversation. Let me know if there's any questions in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to jump right into it. Anything from the team, though? Anything I may have missed in terms of expectation setting? All right, we're going to sally forth. Chief, let's take it away. All right, so the first thing I wanted to highlight is, we launched this initiative, Talent Finance. It is, in many respects, an offshoot of Talent Pipeline Management. And while we wanted to kind of give it a brand and a space to kind of incubate on its own and its own network to build, the ultimate goal is to bring it back into TPM. And I'll talk about what that means in just a bit. But when we talk about talent finance, how we want you to think about it is a new approach, a more public-private approach for how we finance and invest in talent, one that is better fit for our time and not the past. And what was generating a lot of our thinking around this was a lot of the issues you all see and deal with in your communities. A significant concern around the student loan debt size, nearing $1.6 trillion. The ever increasing rate of individuals who are defaulting or are late on those loan payments. Issues about older workers or workers who have already received some kind of training or credentialing who are needing to reskill or upskill but lack the cash flow or financing options to meaningfully access those opportunities. And in thinking through how companies are trying to reinvest how they actually move their investments into the workforce and how they might reimagine the kind of benefits offerings that they can offer to their incumbent workers and how they might have more skin in the game. We talk a lot about what the public investment is, how large it is, and how we're getting questionable return on investment. And we know a lot of individuals are questioning, the return on a college education or a degree, is it worth the cost? Knowing the kind of debt load it's going to carry into the future with uncertain returns. But we also know companies have a tremendous amount of skin in the game. Investing, depending on how you want to calculate, I put it around $200 billion annually, over $30 billion in tuition reimbursement, but also questionable if that investment is being spent in an optimal way. And at the same time, while we're having these finance conversations, we know that there is a number of innovations coming through the financial service sector that are ripe to be leveraged and experimented with in partnerships like TPM. So we think the time is now. We think that the system we've had was really built for a different economy and workforce. And if we're expecting to get different returns, we're going to need a new approach, not only how we engage in partnerships and workforce development like we do in TPM, but also in how we finance and invest in the pipeline itself. And why I think this is most important is, we can solve the partnership problems on the ground, but if we don't change the incentives, how the money flows, we're not going to see the big picture change that we're really going for. And if we change the incentives, we change the marketplace. We get the kind of responsiveness we need, and we get better outcomes for learners and workers. So we decided to put this paper out to say we needed to get enough action on the ground in terms of reinventing employer-led partnerships via TPM. We needed to get the data and technology infrastructure right with some of the other chamber initiatives like JDX and T3. And the idea was if we have enough employer collective action happening on the ground where there's joint procurement and purchasing of talent pipeline solutions combined with new outcomes data that tells us more about where learning happens and with what outcomes than ever before, then we unlock the third piece of the puzzle. We can now address the finance gap, which is we can have a fundamentally new conversation about how we invest in and finance the talent pipeline. So we're excited about this effort. We got the paper released in September, and what we introduced is not only the case for why now, but we also introduced a talent finance framework, which I'll show you in just a second, 9 guiding principles, which I'll also go through. We have 16 recommendations on where to start, prioritizing what employers need to do differently and where they can get started in their states and communities. And we provided 27 examples for what this looks like in action, how it can be a game changer in the lives of learners and workers once they have these new talent finance options available to them. And then, like with all things, we issued a call to action, knowing that while we enjoy the paper writing aspect of this, we do not think of ourselves so much as a think tank as much as a network of action. And we wanted to make sure any ideas we were putting on paper were really a springboard to get us to do work in the field. And we're going to talk with you all about what that's going to potentially look like next year and how you all can be involved as part of that network of action. If you haven't read the paper, I encourage you to take a look at it. We have the link there. You can navigate to it via the Chamber Foundation website. It is, for those of you who are familiar with our prior TPM papers, you'll see this as a natural extension of what we've been doing there, and a natural extension of our theory of action and change and kind of our logic model for how we've been approaching these systemic problems around partnerships, data, and finance, and how now is the time to have the finance conversation that we've been building towards over these past roughly 6-7 years. Next slide. So when we talk about talent finance, we're talking about how we invest in finance and talent. But one important thing I want to point out is it needs to be public and private, and it needs to be for upside opportunity and downside risk management. So it's not private sector alone, it's not public sector alone, but it's the private sector organizing themselves differently and deploying their resources differently in ways that actually create new opportunities for the public sector to partner with them to leverage that leadership to further incent employer investment and then to participate in it. We have a lot of different examples of what that could look like, but it's public and private. And when I say upside opportunity and downside risk management, think of upside opportunity as investments in continuing education, training, and credentialing. It's the usual suspects. But downside risk management is the other side of the coin and is equally as important. And in downside risk management, we're talking about how to manage the income as well as employment risks of the new economy. So think about unemployment insurance modernization, income insurance. Think about new products that help individual learners and workers manage risks, risks of displacement, risks of skill obsolescence. But it's not just managing the upside opportunity, it's how are we giving people better risk management tools and doing that on the benefit side so that they are prepared for when something happens that could cause disruption to their employment or their skills. Think, for example, a pandemic. So we're talking about both and they're both tools in our arsenal when it comes to TPM for how we want to deploy them in ways to enhance our talent pipeline. Next thing I want to introduce to you here is the guiding principles. So we kind of know the why now. We know the rough definition of talent finance, but we're not just talking about any kind of finance tool. We all know that there's strong opinions about predatory behavior and things like that. When we're talking about talent finance in the context of this initiative, we have some guiding principles that set the guardrails for the types of innovations that we want to see come out. We want to make sure they're public and private. They create shared value and they also share and distribute risk. I think right now, most of the risk is borne by the individual learner or worker who has to take out the financing themselves. We expand choice. So financing should unlock more pathways, more choice of providers. It shouldn't lock you in. So we want talent finance innovations that expand choice for not only individuals and the pathways they could pursue, but also employers and the providers they could work with, not locking them in. We want to make sure it's affordable and fair. Talent finance innovation should reduce debt or become more affordable, and they should treat all individuals fairly in terms of the types of lending or finance practices they use. We want to make sure they're data-driven and outcomes-based. It's all about the outcomes. If the finance innovation isn't a better way of achieving better outcomes, it shouldn't be part of the mix. Transparent and accountable. We need maximum transparency to know which innovations work for which populations when. And we need to make sure that we're holding these finance innovations accountable, that if they're not getting the kind of outcomes we're looking for, or if they're having an unintentional consequence, that we can hold them accountable. We want to empower workers with more options for how they finance their preferred education and career pathway that meets their needs, as well as from the employer perspective. And we want to make sure they're fully accessible, that these aren't talent finance innovations for the few, but they're talent finance innovations for the many. And equity has to be at the center of this. If we're advancing new ways of financing and investing in talent, they need to be inclusive. They need to promote diversity and equity across the talent marketplace. So just a little bit of a baseline. I know you probably heard it before, but we like to anchor ourselves at why are we doing this, and how do we need to think about it. This is our anchor. Next slide. We mentioned there's a framework. Don't try to squint too hard to read this. You can access it on page 22 of the paper itself. And this is the framework. Much like TPM is a framework for how you organize strategies for implementing an end-to-end talent supply chain solution, so too does talent finance have a framework. But it's a framework for mapping the ecosystem of all the different finance innovations that are out there today or could be out there in the future. And what it does is identify all the potential issuers, the people who issue a finance innovation, which could be those who originate a loan or an income share agreement or something else, but there are people who issue it, there are people who receive it, and then there's the channel used to route it to them. We kind of created this map so you can identify what is the full ecosystem of financing options that are out there today, who issues what to whom, and where are there gaps within our finance ecosystem, and where there are opportunities for innovation, or where, more interestingly, in my opinion, can we combine innovations in new ways that actually create better deals and better value for learners, workers, and employers. So we created this framework as a map for us to kind of find our way and identify the types of innovations that are going to work for us. Next slide. And the important thing to note about that is when we talk about the finance innovations in that ecosystem, we're not saying it's about any one or another. In talent finance, we want to have an umbrella approach to say it's all the potential innovations around finance, all the new tools, strategies, and mechanisms that we can leverage to find the right finance option for your pipeline. Okay, then the other side of this coin is not, while we know the talent finance ecosystem, what's the enabling infrastructure and set of policies that will allow them to grow? Sorry for the little formatting issue there. When we talk about the finance innovations, we can do this in a very boutique way. We can seed a pilot here or there, but we're all about scale. And think in TPM, back in 2015, we asked 7 networks to kind of pioneer the approach and learn with us as we got in the sandbox. And we had, Peter Beard, who's joining us here today with the Greater Houston Partnership, was among them, to say, before we know, we don't have this fully fleshed out, but let's test it in a few places, and let's gather that learning among peers to actually produce a more refined approach, which eventually led to the TPM curriculum and academy. We want to do a similar thing here. We want to say, how can we seed innovation, but then make sure we're building an enabling infrastructure around it to grow it, so we're not doing a set of boutique pilots, but this becomes mainstream. This becomes how we do things, and we can be doing talent finance innovations in 33 states in Canada like we are in TPM now. But it's going to take a few things. It's going to take enabling state and federal policy, so we're creating rich soil for innovations to take hold and not constraining those innovations. We're going to need more employer collaboration and networking to activate these finance solutions and business models. We're going to need changes on the human capital accounting and reporting side. We need to make sure that when companies go to their books, as they talk about the investments and document the investments they are making in their workforce, that is not there to penalize them or to count as a loss, but it's to count as an investment, and they should be rewarded for it. So we got to get at those incentives that are happening on the accounting and reporting side. We want to look at the data infrastructure. How are we always getting better data about outcomes and where people learn and with what outcomes that can inform underwriting of new finance investments? And we want to make sure that we have quality assurance for all pathways that can be financed. And last but not least, a new risk infrastructure. We score, identify, measure, and manage risk all day long in the financing world, but we don't do it when it comes to talent and workforce development. What we're suggesting in this paper is this is the time to have that conversation, because if we can't identify, score, and measure somebody's inherent risk for access and completion and good employment earnings outcomes, we can't intervene in the ways we need to get better results. So by measuring risk, we can manage it, and by managing it, we can find a way to mitigate it, reduce it, or completely get rid of it. So we think there are new ways of scoring and identifying risk that could be part of this infrastructure that could fundamentally change how we manage the financing of education and training pathways and upskilling opportunities. So this isn't an exhaustive list. We're just trying to say in the paper, we need the innovations themselves, but we always need to be cultivating the infrastructure around them to make sure they can grow and be mainstream. We're doing both and in the context of this initiative. Next slide. So as we introduced this paper, we kicked off an event series. The paper came out on September 21st, and we convened 5 forums to really dig into the topics and themes of the paper, and to hear not just from the team that wrote the paper, but to hear from members of this growing movement. So we had a number of college presidents, folks who run technology companies. We had the president of SHRM and many others come to the table to talk about why this paper spoke to them, and why some of the ideas and themes and recommendations in the paper should be acted upon now. So we want to make sure it wasn't us just talking at you, but we were trying to grow a movement of folks who are ready and willing to take action with us to bring about this transformation in how we finance and invest in talent. Next slide. Oh, and there's once you get the slide deck, there's a link to the YouTube videos if you care to go back and watch those forums. I did want to preview for you that we have some more stuff coming out. It wasn't just about the paper and events, but as of this week, I think, I'm seeing nods from Sarah and Chief. Our Talent Finance digital magazine is now available. So if you want to re-experience the paper, or perhaps you don't want to read the 60 to 70 pages of the paper, but would rather a more bite-sized form of ingesting the content, we have now made this option available to you. So in collaboration with Working Nation, we have launched this digital magazine, which allows you to experience excerpts of the paper along with other media content. So interviews, excerpts from the forum series, video excerpts. We have animations with voiceovers. We have videos offering examples and case studies of some of the innovations that are discussed in the paper. There's a lot of different content and a lot of different ways to enjoy it. So if you like a more interactive multimedia experience in bite-sized chunks, I highly recommend this paper, the digital magazine for you. But if you like the more, I don't know, academic or scholarly approach and nice casual reading, we have a white paper for you that dives into a lot more detail. And the good news about this digital magazine is it can be a living document. So we're going to work with Working Nation to figure out how we can continue to grow and evolve the content that's featured in there over time. So go check it out. If you have a chance, if you just go to the Chamber Foundation website under Talent Finance, you can find the link to it. Or I'm pretty sure someone could throw it in the chat box if they haven't done it already. And last but not least, I wanted to inform you of something else that'll be coming out, but will not be available until Q1 of next year, and that is the SHRM Chamber Foundation Survey. What we have done is, as of this week, we will be executing a national survey of employers, where we will be gathering data, not just on what employers have done before. Others have gathered that data, SHRM and many others, on what the employer investment is. We know it's there, but where are employers at now in thinking differently about how they are going to finance and invest in their future workforce and their current workforce? And we're going to get a sense from them of just how strong is their appetite for innovation and where they want to pursue that innovation, which is kind of how we're having this conversation today. But we're not surveying 1,000 individual employers as much as we are engaging with our network to say, how are you thinking about talent finance innovation? How were you thinking about it? How are you thinking about it now? And how do we meet you where you're at? So we make sure we right size and tailor talent finance to meet you where you're at, so it could be a useful tool in your arsenal as you go about your work. But we do want to bring this data back to you because we like data, and we want to make sure we're getting some statistically relevant data points that we can share with you all on how employers are thinking about this topic. So we're looking forward to bringing the results and analysis of that survey to you, which will be available early or mid first quarter of next year. But we'll have updates on that front in the very near future. Next slide, I think we have here. Should be, all right. So before I get into the TPM stuff, I want to pause right there to see if Any of my colleagues had anything they wanted to emphasize about talent finance and the work we've done to date, or if there's any burning questions. And then as soon as we wrap that up, I'm going to get into a more deeper dive discussion about how talent finance connects to TPM. So I'm going to open up to our team. Anyone want to add anything else on the TPM side or the talent finance side?
And Jason, this is Peter, and I'm going to put this in the chat, but McKinsey released this survey that showed that more and more companies are having to think about what are their capabilities going forward and are more focused on what's the learning they have to internalize in the organization and kind of go forward, which kind of gets to the SHRM survey as well.
Thank you, Peter. All right, anything from our friends at the Federal Reserve Bank or Bob?
No, not for me.
None for me either.
All right, let's get into the fun TPM stuff then. All right, so now we know, hopefully we're all a little bit smarter about what talent finance is all about, and at least have started thinking about what it can mean for us. But I did want to draw some more direct line of sight between talent finance and TPM. And how I want you all to think about it is talent finance is essentially an extension of TPM. For those of you who are familiar with Job Data Exchange, that was an extension of Strategy 3 in TPM. It said, hey, while we're organizing the hiring requirements and making them more competency and skill based, we need to make sure that manifests itself as structured data in our HR systems. So how do we make sure the great conversation and survey tools and discussion we're having about those requirements are actually captured as data in our HR workflow process? We're still incubating that. That work is still underway, but now what we're trying to say is in Strategy 5, we have this little old section called aligning incentives. Remember that? When you're co-designing the talent supply chain, you're aligning performance and incentives. And when we talk about incentives, we talk about all the things employers could put on the table to incent performance in their talent supply chain. What we do now is take that part of Strategy 5 and we put it on steroids and say that is a much more larger discussion than what is currently captured in the TPM curriculum and academy experience, and it needs its own space to kind of find its way so we can understand its full complexity and support it. But the goal is to back it in so talent finance essentially becomes a more robust subunit of Strategy 5. So it's an extension of how you finance and invest and align the incentives in your talent pipeline, both for external hires, so folks who are coming through your preferred provider networks, and how are they financing that experience and accessing incentives to get them in the pipe, to keep them there, and to make sure they have good outcomes with all of you, as well as internal pipelines. So once I have them, what do I do with them? Think about all the benefit side of it. How do I make sure individuals are supported in their role, are retained in their role, and have opportunities to advance in their role? And what are the financing tools and other benefits they need to meaningfully access those advancement opportunities? It's both and. It's how we finance new talent coming in, where employers could play a bigger role than we've even talked about before. And we're going to show you some examples of what that could look like. It's very exciting. And then how, once people are actually employed, do we give them the support they need, and what do employers control as far as financing tools and benefits that could actually help always encourage workers to invest more in themselves? So it's both and. It's a natural extension of the value chain mapping process. We're just talking about, much like how we aligned learning across the continuum, how are we aligning the learning outcomes to the competency hiring requirements? Now we're aligning the financing strategies to make sure we have the right financing tool instead of incentives all across the pipeline to get people in so they have a more affordable and outcome-based pathway, but also that we're better retaining and growing incumbent workers once we have them. So it's a natural extension of 5. And I used to say, think of employer collaboratives as data collaboratives, because much of the doing your homework is data collection. And that's where our Job Data Exchange spun out of, and our T3 Innovation Network, which is trying to get that data infrastructure piece right. Employer collaboratives are data collaboratives, but even more so, what we want them and need them to be is finance collaboratives. They're all the same thing. They're closing the partnership gap, the data gap, and the finance gap. And TPM combined with these other pieces, it solves all 3 gaps for the talent marketplace. You are the tip of the spear on that. You're bringing closure to these 3 gaps. And if you bring finance in, you're kind of closing the loop. It's the last mile and arguably the most important. So employer collaboratives are now going to be finance collaboratives. And as part of this, what we suspected and what we took away from the last convening that we held, which was more of our capstone, less us getting a lot of the VIPs talking at the audience and more the audience talking to us about their priorities. We use some fun interactive tools to do that. But there were two big takeaways. There were more than two, but the two I'm going to highlight for you are get to pilots and demonstrations as fast as possible. What's the chamber known for? Not just talking about it, doing something about it. So get to pilots as quickly as you can. And then secondly, pursue pilots first and foremost where there are collaboratives of companies who could come around a solution. And why that's important is you all have the secret sauce to changing business models out there. Right now, where there's these alternative financing strategies and approaches, they are sold as one-offs, either directly to an institution like a college or university, or they are marketed to a single employer at a time. There is not enough deal flow there or volume in order to kind of bring these innovations to the kind of scale they need to go mainstream. When we were doing this initiative and there were alternative financing partners out there, like groups like Social Finance and Macomb Capital and Meritize and Ion, and the list goes on, what they kept coming back to us is, wait a minute, you're telling me there is a network out there of hundreds of organizations that are organizing one or more employer collaboratives on the ground that could essentially jointly negotiate, procure, or purchase a talent finance innovation. Count us in. And that's the key, joint procurement and purchasing. That's what TPM is all about. It's the power of the network, engaging in collective action to get more responsiveness and to actually be able to negotiate, co-design, and manage a talent pipeline. Now we're saying you can use the same leverage to activate new and scalable finance innovations on behalf of the learners and workers who are going to benefit from the pipelines you all create. Even more so, it's going to benefit the employers who are going to be able to exercise their leverage to get better deals for their workers, but who are also going to be able to activate more affordable pipelines that they can invest in as well and potentially generate revenue. So there's a whole lot, think of all those conversations we have in the academy experience where we're saying, how do we pay for it? And we talk about membership dues in all kinds of ways. What we're suggesting now with talent finance, it unlocks new conversations for how employers could put skin in the game in ways that actually generate returns for them, actual revenue that could sustain the work of the host organization or those that staff the collaborative. Lots of opportunities here, but we see finance as a powerful tool to not only get better deals and better outcomes, but to get more responsiveness from the pipelines you're going to be activating, but also can be done in creative ways that actually generate returns for the employer themselves or the employer collaboratives. So this unlocks the power of collective action. And yep, that's the last bullet. So those are the main connections to TPM. The big one is it's an extension of Strategy 5, and think of an employer collaborative as a way of engaging in collective action to activate new and alternative finance solutions. If we go to the next slide. What I wanted to preview for you all is what comes next. And I believe this is, if I'm remembering correctly, our last slide before we get to the more interactive stuff. So thank you for bearing with me. So I wanted to preview with you all how we're thinking about doing this next, because we're pretty much closing phase 1 of talent finance. We did the paper, we did the event series, we got the digital magazine out, and the survey is coming in on the back end. But now what we want to start is understanding who within the network is the ready and the willing that wants to take the next step. And this is how we're thinking about the next step. Number 1, pursue innovations in the field. Pilot and demonstrate. We don't need to go large all at once, but can we get a handful of players, a half dozen to a dozen sites, communities, and sets of partners who are willing to actually experiment with us with some new talent finance innovations to see how they work in their pipeline, and to learn from them, and to learn from your experience and your trial and error in order to understand how we might be able to come up with a set of best practices that could be distilled down into a set of learning experiences that could be built into TPM as a part of the framework itself. So we want to move to demonstrations as quickly as possible. And next year, we will be looking for a half dozen to a dozen sites to join us as a peer-to-peer network to experiment together, to learn together, and to report out to not only the TPM network, but also to the Talent Finance Network. So we're looking for those folks. What I want to emphasize, though, is what we're trying to engage in now is a planning process. We're not going all in because we all need to learn together. And much like in 2015, we needed to sit down and actually plan and experiment a little bit. Same thing here. We want folks to come in and plan it with us. And then we'll talk about how the chamber and others can support you all to actually raise the money needed to implement your solution to the extent you need that. It's a planning process is what I want to emphasize. Next, in order to help get us ready for that, because a lot of us aren't finance experts. I certainly wasn't over a year ago, still probably am not. But if we were all going to get a little smarter so we know how to have the right conversation with the right partners in our community about this, we might need a little help along the way. So one of the things that we're going to actually poll you on, but we wanted to telegraph to you, is that we are interested in potentially putting together a design workshop very early next year. By very early, I mean end of January, sometime beginning of February. But we would have an extended session where we could bring in experts and set up a format where you would have time to come in and just learn more about each of these innovations that are out there, and have time, whether individually or as members of teams, to begin just thinking through, well, how could I design it to fit my needs? What are the questions I need answered? How can I combine innovations in different ways to see if it's the right fit? But how do we just buy ourselves some time so we're not just asking you to apply for one of these planning grants, as much as we're asking you, hey, if you're interested in potentially applying, would you be interested in coming to the table and learning more with us, and maybe having kind of a little sandbox environment where we could just test and learn from our peers about how to think about it, so we're more prepared for that RFP or solicitation if and should it come. Next, in addition to standing up the pilots, we want to document case studies, storytelling, best practices. We want to keep the communication work going forward. So we want to grow that digital magazine. We want to make sure that we're capturing the human side of the storytelling and always building a bigger movement and bigger audience for the work that we're doing and the innovations being pursued in the field. And then lastly, we wanted to make sure you all had an opportunity to participate in future work groups. So while we want to do innovations in the field, we also need to set up a set of national conversations about that enabling infrastructure. So who among you wants to have a seat at the table to talk about state policy alignment, to activate more talent finance innovations and not constrain them? Who among you wants to have a seat at the table to talk about how we can change HR accounting and reporting practices? Or who among you wants to come and talk about the kind of outcomes data that we need to underwrite better innovations, but that we also need to talk about what are the missing pieces of the data infrastructure to produce that outcomes data. But these are conversations that cut across states and boundaries. It's a shared infrastructure needed if we're going to make these talent finance innovations mainstream. So we not only want to engage with all of you and potentially other networks on demonstrating innovations, but we want to make sure you all have a voice and seat at the table to take your learnings and best practices and talk about what needs to change in the ecosystem to do this work even better and bigger over time. So that's what's coming next, and that's where we want to engage all of you to kind of figure out, among at least the TPM faithful, for those that are the ready and the willing who want to take this step with us, how are you thinking about engaging with us, and what's resonating with you, or what should be prioritized, so we know where to place our bets going forward. So before I transition us now into the interactive session, thank you so much for bearing with me, and hopefully everyone's had a chance to introduce themselves, or if you haven't, I encourage you, and if you joined late, please do introduce yourself in the chat box. I want to again stop and see anyone from the TPM team or talent finance team want to revisit any points that I made, fill in any gaps, or try to focus the attention of our TPM participants before we move into the polling section. So open it up to the team. Peter, I'm going to call on you. You kind of bridge the two camps. You were a TPM fellow, a longtime practitioner and faculty member, and you are an author of the Talent Finance paper. So you, as not, I could sit here and wax poetic on the theory of talent finance and talent supply chain management, but you have a finance background and you're doing this work on the ground. So if I can impose upon you to maybe address your peers and just talk about kind of how you're seeing these two worlds combine, I think that would be useful before we go into the polling session.
I think thanks, Jason. The way I've always looked at it, and, as Jason, Bob, and Jamie and I had conversations about this, was really about how do we help folks think about the risks they're taking as they get ready to, choose programs or work through programs. And to Jason's point, it generally falls on the individual, but it also falls on the employer. And there's no kind of risk sharing, risk mitigation that aligns the interests. And, when you think about how quickly the world's changing, and who knew that when we started this, we were going to be in the middle of a pandemic, that disrupted everything and we're going to have dislocated workers, that we actually need to think very differently about what are the ways to help manage these risks in a way that's positive for employers and positive for individuals. And I think, you know, there are lots of different ideas that are embedded in the paper that look at that, which is how do you think about the financing piece of this, but then how do you think about the career navigation, the career coaching that actually help people make better decisions so that they actually get a return on investment. You know, when you think about, you know, what's showing up today in terms of the amount of student debt that's out there with probably unsatisfactory outcomes, it's, you know, it's an important time, and we have the ability to kind of influence, you know, employers to think differently about this. You know, and that's part of why I found the McKinsey article interesting, in the sense that people are beginning to understand that they're going to have to build this capability differently. So I think, you know, now's a perfect time for us to be thinking about that. And so was really excited that, you know, we had this partnership to begin thinking about and putting on the table, very much like Jason and Bob did for TPM back in 2014. You know, get people talking about this, because this actually has to change, because it's not going to, I mean, otherwise we're not going to be competitive as a country, and we're not going to be competitive as regions. And that's one way that I think about it. Is that helpful, Jason?
Very, Peter, thank you. Bob, any, was that Sarah?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I really, you know, like how Peter is underscoring kind of the career navigation component of this and how that directly links to TPM rather. But I think we also want to look at this through the lens of equity and inclusion, and that these types of partnerships kind of open the door for folks to get access to training investments and skill development along a lifespan in a way that wasn't necessarily possible before, when they disproportionately held a lot of that financial burden. So I know that that connects directly to what you're doing as well, but it's a very perfect time. And even when we launched this during a pandemic, some of the initial outcomes from the pilots around income share agreements and things like that proved to be very successful, because they weren't, you know, the workers weren't holding the bag to repay those costs absent a job. So I think it really did bore out, you know, how we're looking at this to be kind of fair and equitable.
Bob, anything you want to add for our peers?
No, I just want to emphasize how this could be an important extension of Strategy 5, where TPM would provide the foundation for making much more transparent alternative pathways. So think of alternative financing approaches for alternative pathways, as well as alternative financing mechanisms for traditional pathways. But TPM provides the foundation for finance innovation. And I just want to emphasize the potential power of employer collaboratives in getting better financing alternatives for students and workers and employers themselves.
And Jason, I think one of the other pieces to this is big business is going to figure this out. They have the resources to figure out the ROI and put in the systems to do this. It's the small and medium enterprises that exist in all of our communities that are huge drivers of our economy that need the ability to access this kind of thing. And I think this idea of the collective cooperative purchasing power of employers is going to be essential in terms of how we frame this, and that there's actually value creation that occurs.
Right. Thank you all for adding those comments. Now we're going to get to the fun stuff. So I'm going to give you, I told you, I suggested I was done with the slides. I'm a liar. There's going to be 3 more, but they're useful to you, because we're going to ask you a series of poll questions. It's coming up, so get ready. But I want to get the juices flowing before you answer those questions about how to think about potentially engaging in a talent finance innovation as part of TPM. And as you're thinking about this, no one's putting this in stone. Like, this is just fun, creative exercise. We just want to know, when we put this stuff out there, how do you all react to it? Where are you at? Because we want to make sure we meet you where you're at, and we'll give you opportunities to change your mind. But we first want to say, okay, well, that sounds very abstract. I mean, you're talking about downside risk management tools and UI modernization. What does it mean for me in TPM? I'm just trying to get stuff done in my community. I'm trying to make this framework work for me. Let me get it down to brass tacks and give you 3 examples. And remember, in TPM, we always say there's a very basic way of doing something and a very advanced way. Start basic, work your way to advanced. But you got to find your way as you're managing the framework, kind of what level of sophistication you're at. But you can always get more advanced and complicated to the extent that you've gotten more practice doing it. So it's not a zero-sum game. But we want to give you a basic way and an advanced way of thinking about this before you answer these questions, because some of you might want to start in a basic way. Some of you may be more ambitious and want to think about something a little bit more creative. The art of what is possible. So I mentioned the framework covers a lot of different innovations that can be combined in a lot of different ways. That's what makes talent finance unique. We're talking about the entire ecosystem of innovations per the guiding principles, not just privileging any one. So these are 3 randomized examples that are loosely based in reality, based on conversations that have been had with folks. So we're not naming names, but we know these things are possible or being considered. And much like a lot of our exercises in the curriculum, we don't name names, but a lot of them are steeped in actual stories and experiences that we've had within the network. So 3 quick examples just to make you think in a more concrete way, what does this look like on the ground exactly? If I'm going to be asked questions about what I'm going to do with it. So here's a basic approach. Basic approach number 1, example 1, involves a single employer. Here's an example of a large company, so over 500 employees, who offers a tuition reimbursement benefit that is not used very often, and they're interested in using that money differently, that benefit differently, and instead converting it to now negotiating a deeply discounted price with a third-party vendor who could come in and provide shorter-term training that once complete and badged, they negotiate credit for that training and that badge with a local college or university. So now instead of me asking you to front several $1,000s potentially to go and pursue outside of work and education at an accredited college or university that you then later have to be reimbursed for, and even then, I'm not sure if it connects with your education pathway that you're on or it's relevant to the industry that you're in, but it's kind of just a very basic tuition reimbursement program that requires a lot of upfront cash flow. I am instead going to go in and say, I'm going to give you more bite-sized micro-credential training opportunities at a deeply discounted rate. I'm going to buy down what that training costs. And for every course module you complete and badge earned, know that that counts as credit towards a local college, which you could apply towards a degree in one of the areas that's consistent with an industry pathway that we care about. So we know that you're building on the skill set you're developing here and advancing a career within this industry. The employer changes the benefit, how they're spending their money. They activate a new service that provides reskilling and upskilling opportunities for their workers, and they get a discounted rate that doesn't require a significant upfront cash flow on behalf of the incumbent worker. What is more, if we're trying to add a little bit more complexity to this basic example, is not only are they providing that new kind of benefit, that deeply discounted on-demand training in-house, but they're also now negotiating with that company to see if they can supply their workers with outplacement assistance, saying, should there be an event where an employee at this company gets dislocated, as one of their severance benefits, they get to access this company that can provide job matching services to other companies in our community where they have an adjacent skill set. So we want to make sure that individuals aren't entirely on their own or reliant on the public workforce system, but there is an opportunity for them to work with a preferred provider of outplacement assistance that we've made available to our employees. So we've activated not only an upside opportunity benefit, so people are spending less to access more readily available training that counts as credit at a deeply discounted rate without upfront cash flow needs. Should there be a downside event like displacement, we're going to provide a little extra support to make sure that they are able to connect to the next employment opportunity as seamlessly as possible and that they're not on their own. So this is a simple example 1 of a single company just changing the way they're managing existing benefits. Before I move on to the next example, did anyone on our team want to comment on this? Nope. Okay. Example 2. Now we're getting into more creative stuff. Because remember, what I told you is one of the things we received a lot of feedback on was pursue innovations where multiple companies come together. That's the new business model. So here's a basic approach now involving multiple employers, let's say in an employer collaborative. So now we have a collaborative of companies, let's say a dozen or more. and they are working with their provider partners, local colleges and universities, who they have a long-standing relationship with in TPM, and they've decided that they are going to offer a better financing option for the students coming through those systems, those education pathways. And what they're going to do is they're going to combine powers, the employers coming together with the providers. They've done all their homework. They've built the pipeline. They know how many they, for a particular position, they know how many they need, where they're going to need them, the requirements for meeting the need, where they've gotten that need from, where they're getting it from in the future. They've done all of that underwriting. And now they're coming in and saying, because we've done this tremendous homework together, let's combine forces and go and bring in a new financing partner to say, can we actually negotiate a better deal for learners who are coming through our pipeline? And let's say it's a loan offering. So now learners who are enrolled in that program know, hey, these companies are on the other end of this pipeline. We're recruiting them because we're a preferred provider to those companies. We can get you better outcomes. We can prove it. But now we can also get you a better financing deal. So you could take out a federal loan, or you could take out a loan for half the rate. We have a different loan offering because we've underwritten this deal already. We got good outcomes we can demonstrate. You can actually take out a different loan product at half the interest rate. All you have to do is enroll in this particular pipeline, which is what we negotiated for. So now a student who would have normally had borne all the risk and the higher interest rate is now paying a portion of what they would have paid before. So it's a huge incentive to join that pipeline, and it makes for a more affordable education opportunity with a traditional loan product. Now let's say they've been employed. Because they've chosen to seek employment with a company in the collaborative, they have jointly negotiated a benefit offering with a provider of a service that now helps them actually process loan repayments. So long as you stay employed with a member of our collaborative, you could stay in network, but not out of network. You will benefit from a loan repayment option where we will pay back a portion of your loan so long as you stay employed within this network. So that's example two. Oh, go ahead.
I think there are two things with even in this example that are helpful when we think about risks and alignment. When you look at the second bullet point, if you think about if there was some sort of application that confirmed that this person was likely to be successful in the program, you've begun the de-risking for the individual and de-risking for the lender. And then when you think about, as long as they're in the collaborative of employers, it de-risks this whole issue that we confront, which is what happens if one of my fellow companies hires someone away from me. And therefore, it is like we've invested in creating this talent pipeline, and we're going to share this workforce in a very different way. And we're not going to end up, I'm not going to be the one who trained this person and skilled them to this level to then lose them to another company. So I think there are ways that you can think about how risk is managed within kind of this example that encourages folks to engage and not disengage.
Yeah. And on the pathway side, the upside side of this, companies didn't have to do anything except go in and use their combined power to negotiate a better deal on behalf of those learners. What a great way to kind of show your commitment to your pipeline. Let's get you a more affordable education. And all we have to do is demonstrate that we have the partnership that these lenders were blind to before. And then they could decide once somebody's employed if they want to continue to manage their benefits in ways that incents workers to stay within the collaborative and not leave. Of course, if someone wants to pursue another opportunity, no harm, no foul, but the benefit no longer goes with them. But they at least benefit from getting a more affordable education. So there's hopefully good PR there. So that's example two, very basic, just power of collective action to negotiate a better financing product, in this case, a loan that then connected to a loan repayment plan. Wonderful incentives that keep people in the pipeline and keep them retained in employment. And now let's move to the more creative final example, which is an advanced approach involving multiple collaboratives. Some of you may be familiar with ISAs, income share agreements. They go by other names, career impact bonds, but essentially it's an equity-based approach to financing education. Instead of somebody taking out debt, somebody else makes an equity investment in them. They purchase their education for them or a portion of it, and then they have an equity stake in the future earnings of that individual. So I pay nothing up front, but once I start making money up and above a certain threshold, let's say $40,000, I owe a percentage of my paycheck at the end of the year, my total earnings. And there's other ways of structuring it, but let's say it's 5% owed of my total earnings every year. Somebody has an equity stake, and that goes for as long as 12 years with a buyout option if I'm making spectacular earnings. But it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about it, where if there's a pandemic hits or something, I have no debt. I don't owe anything. So if I'm below a certain income threshold and it's not my fault, and I'm dislocated for an amount of time, it's built-in insurance. I am not making payments. Think about federal loans. Absent an act of Congress, you're going to keep making those payments. So this is a different way of thinking about how to finance it. And there's some of these ISA innovations are occurring around the country today, but they're happening in a very boutique fashion. A lot of debate about them. I'm not saying you should like them or not like them. I'm just saying think about them in the context of this example. So an employer collaborative decides, hey, instead of negotiating a better loan product, we want to get a little bit more creative. Let's now pool our money into an ISA fund that we've created that's employer-backed and managed. It's our pool of funds that we have contributed towards our local chamber of commerce, who has brought those funds together, but who has also gone out and secured an investment from a local philanthropic organization, from a state government agency, let's say from an investment firm or a bank. But we have pooled an investment fund together. And what we are going to do is take an equity stake in our future talent pipeline. We are going to buy into our future workforce. We will buy your education for you if you come join our pipeline and are part of our preferred provider or come through our preferred provider network. So now individuals have a choice. I can either take out a loan, 30 or whatever, however, whatever the terms of the federal Stafford loan is now, or I can take this ISA product out that's available because the employers are backing this pipeline. And now they have an equity stake in my future success and earnings. And I have built in insurance. So if something happens along the way, I know I don't owe if I'm below a certain threshold. And now let's get extra creative. So now I've got access to potentially a much more interesting product than I would have before because by virtue of this agreement. But now once I'm hired, it gets a little bit more interesting. So now because there is an enabling state policy, remember that infrastructure? Let's say you got good state policy alignment. There's interesting stuff happening at the state level. What if employers who now have set up these ISA accounts have the option to defer up to 50% of an employee's state income tax withholding? This is state income tax. I could defer every year a portion, up to 50%, and instead reinvest it in a lifelong learning account, which is now available in my state. So individuals are able to, much like a healthcare savings account, put in these kind of pre-tax dollars into a lifelong learning account, skill savings account, whatever you want to call it. But it's my flexible account that travels with me wherever I go, and I could spend it on a wide variety of reskilling and upskilling opportunities. But now employers say, because you've taken this product, you're now eligible to receive this deferment. So instead of the money going to the state, we could put it in your account, and you're able to redirect 50% of your ISA payment to the employer collaborative into that account as well. So we're coming up with all these creative ways of saying, how do we now get these people who receive this product to always be thinking about investing more in themselves and encouraging employers to redirect money as well as individuals to redirect money. And you could even set it up much like a lot of 401ks are set up, where any additional contribution on top of that can receive matching dollars on behalf of the employer. That third bullet gets really complex. We're just saying, in addition to negotiating better financing options, once you start connecting to the benefits side and you want to bring state policy into it, you can start experimenting with new types of products as well as new types of tax incentives and deferments that could always be encouraging employers and in workers to constantly invest in their skills and education. There's ways we can play with this on the margins that could have big impact on our workforce, and we can actually be using the employer spend a lot more creatively and effectively, and we could do it as a network. So I've gone on way too long. Is there anybody else on our team that wants to comment on any of these examples? Just 3 random examples, no magic to them, just different ways of combining innovations through employer leadership that you can see could manifest themselves in better deals for learners and workers and could achieve better outcomes in terms of completion, retention, and career advancement. All right, onto the fun stuff. So now we're going to ask you to participate in a poll. You've just learned a heck of a lot about talent finance, its connection to TPM, and how to think about the two coming together in some concrete ways. Now what we want to do is get a sense from you that you came here for a reason, you're interested in this topic. We want you to think about or be willing to think about organizing a pilot of your own. And if this was a choose your own adventure, we want to give you a set of choices to work through to kind of give us a sense of how you would think about leveraging an opportunity like this in your community. So if we're ready, I might suggest to Sarah that we begin the polling process. All right, first question. What would likely be the scope of your pilot should you pursue one? You are a TPM practitioner. You are interested in being part of a talent finance pilot or demonstration. And now you're thinking, okay, if I had to wrap my hands around a project, where might I start? Option one, and you could pick it when it says multiple choice. That I know that's kind of confusing. It means you could pick as many as you want. So you could pick all four if you wanted. You could pick one. You don't have to pick any, but you break my heart if you didn't do that. So pick one or more that fits your needs. A single employer, pretty straightforward there. The next one is multiple employers in a collaborative. So think of a single TPM collaborative. Option three is multiple collaboratives in a specific region. Think single employer, think Amazon. Multiple employers in a collaborative. Think of the cybersecurity collaborative in Phoenix. Multiple collaboratives in a specific region. Think of all 4 employer collaboratives in Phoenix pursuing an innovation. And then multiple collaboratives across a larger geography. Think about the work Kentucky has done, where they have a statewide network of 27 collaboratives that might all come in to say, hey, we are one big pilot and demonstration site here. We're going to pursue it as a statewide network. So give us a sense of the scope. How ambitious are you thinking? Is it hyper-local? Or if you have a larger network, would you think about doing a pilot or demonstration that involves more employers or more collaboratives across a given region? So hopefully everyone gets a chance to input their results. I'd ask my team not to skew the data. And let's see what the results are. All right, well, we have a clear winner with multiple employers in a collaborative. So a single collaborative pilot or demonstration. Coming in as a number 2 is with a single employer, but a close third was multiple collaboratives in a region. Statewide ambitions may be beyond us right now, but definitely we did get some folks signaling that. So there may be one there or more worth pursuing. But seems like that the sweet spot is multiple employers in a collaborative. Any commentary from the team? All right, that one's pretty straightforward. Next question, easy one for you. So we know the scope of your pilot. Question number 2, what is your industry focus area? Now, because there are limitations or constraints on Zoom polling, we had to get this list down to a tight list. We know it doesn't cover everything, but if there's something in there that's not covered, we just encourage you to put other, and unfortunately you can't write in a response. But just what are some of the priority industries that you would want to focus this innovation on? Who are the squeaky wheels or the most willing to maybe experiment with the talent finance innovation? And we know some of you don't approach it as a sector-based collaborative, but humor us for these purposes. And again, you could select more than one. About 10 seconds. And the results? All right, pretty across the board, but healthcare leading the pack. And then we have construction and manufacturing coming in second and third with a possible tie with information technology. Yes. Okay, so a lot of the usual suspects, I'd say. Any observations from the team? Anything that stands out? Yep, pretty consistent with TPM as a whole. All right, let's keep moving. All right, questions are going to get a little harder for you now. Now we know all of you might not know what all of these financing options are, and you could choose more than one. So even if you know a little bit about something that sounds interesting, we encourage you to check it. But of the finance innovations you've been exposed to through this discussion or others that preceded it, which would you be most interested in? So we know your scope of your collaborative, we know your industry priority area, but what type of innovation, whether it's an income share agreement, I talked a little bit about those, a loan product and loan repayments, which we know a little bit about, tuition assistance, paid work-based learning, lifelong learning accounts, skill savings accounts. I talked about what those could look like, more flexible savings accounts for education and upskilling opportunities that follow the worker. Social impact bonds, that's outcomes-based financing. So financing that happens after outcomes have been achieved. We could get into the complexity of it, but some of you have heard about that through like state policy, but there's some innovative work happening where there's an investment in the outcomes achieved. short-term and long-term savings accounts for incumbent workers, income or employment insurance products, and severance payments and outplacement assistance. I spoke a little bit about outplacement assistance. So register your votes. Anyone on my team who has a better explanation for any of those that want to make sure isn't missed by this group, I encourage you to speak up before we close the poll. Again, no right or wrong answer here. It's just there's a lot of different types. These are just categories of innovations, a lot of different ways of doing them. But of all the possibilities that are out there, which ones intrigue you the most as like, I'd like to learn more about it and I'd consider bringing that into my pilot or demonstration or have my industry consider it? About 10 more seconds. All right, let's see the results. Okay, clear winner with paid work-based learning experiences with tuition assistance right behind it. Some scattered interest around loan repayments and ISAs. Lifelong learning accounts came across pretty strong. Yeah, and I think what we've consistently seen is there's usually stronger interest upfront with the upside opportunity financing options, with some interest, but not quite as much when it comes to the downside risk management. And that's relatively a newer space, and clearly government plays a very big role in that space. So thinking about where there can be private sector innovation can be a little challenging. We think there's some very interesting things that could be done there. But I think what we've learned from the talent finance conversations, what's being reinforced here, is that if you're going to start somewhere, you're probably going to get the most interest and engagement when it comes to the upside opportunity investments to begin with. And it might be that we need to either always have one project in the downside risk management kind of that we can learn from, or we need to come back to that at a more appropriate time when we're ready to take it on. Any feedback from the team? Good stuff, though, and I'm glad we saw that paid work-based learning. That's definitely going to invite some new considerations for our team for how to factor that in. All right, let's go to the next poll. All right, now we know how you're thinking about pilot demonstration, the scope, the industry focus, and the innovation. Now what we want to know is if we had some of those national discussions, like work groups, that met periodically to talk about state policy alignment or outcomes-based data to better inform alternative financing. Or you'll notice I mentioned HR accounting before. There's another one in here, TPM training. How much of a priority should we make TPM training so we're actually developing a set of course modules that can be incorporated into the TPM Academy framework and TPM Next platform, which hopefully most of you know about. So again, no right or wrong answer here, and you don't have to answer this one, but this is more just a sense of, we know a lot of you are interested in doing stuff in your communities, but if you wanted to see for a national discussion, are any of these topics kind of standing out to you as like first and foremost, that's where I want to be. You guys should be doing that conversation first because that matters to us the most. Maybe about 10 seconds. All right, Sarah, what did we learn? All right, TPM training, clear winner. And that's something we're going to be thinking about but we want to do before we distill, and we need to learn more about how to do it right so we can actually bake it into the training platform itself and as part of the framework. So we're definitely going to see what we can do to kind of move that up as much as possible. So it becomes part and parcel of the TPM DNA. But the next two contenders are state policy and outcomes data and quality assurance. So Peter, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I mean, this whole issue of outcomes data and quality assurance, when you think about, where the, finance and insurance industries have gone, it is really based upon their data and the ability to predict risk and mitigate and manage risk. And so that's going to be a really important critical platform that's obviously linked to JDX and T3. But this is to really get to the innovations that are going to be necessary. This platform and understanding and having data and quality assurance and recognizing we're going to improve over time, but we got to start somewhere. It's going to be critical, kind of almost from at some point we need that in place before we get to any of the other things.
Right. For anyone that put other in, I would, if you're willing, I'd encourage you to maybe elaborate on that in the chat box. I'd be curious to see what you're thinking of. All right, let's go to the next question. Okay. Now, this is how I want you to think about this one. What do you need first and foremost when it comes to actually being part of a peer group of demonstrations? So if we were to actually put this opportunity out there and you were saying, but for this thing, I would not be able to participate. What is most important to you in order to be part of a talent finance demonstration? And when I say demonstration, I mean a planning process. To join a planning process next year, to have a seat at the table, to be one of the 6 or 12, what do you need most? And I say first and foremost, but this is multiple choice, so you can select more than one of these. We encourage you to if you need more than one thing. But your options are funding, which we assume could predominantly be used to cover your time spent on the project, access to finance experts and technical assistance, networking and peer learning opportunities with all of you, communication support, evaluation support, or other. So you could pick as many as you like, but we're trying to figure out if we can give you one or two things to help get you to the table, what would it be? And while you're filling that out, our good friend Jeff Griffiths from Canada suggested the other, and he's trying to figure out how to make it work in Canada, which that's a pretty good other. Definitely agree. There's particularly when you talk about state and federal policy, there's it's a different environment. So when we start talking about other countries, we need to potentially have a different set of conversations. So we're with you, Jeff. Okay, let's see the results of the survey. Hopefully everyone got the response in. All right. So access to experts came out on top. Next is funding to cover time spent on the project, and then networking and peer learning opportunities. Seems like communication and evaluation were appreciated, but not the most important to get to the table. Good deal. Okay. I think we can do those things. Let's go to the next question. And this might be our last one. All right, pretty sure this is the last one. Okay. All right, so now I mentioned that, we want to know, what do you need to have a seat at the table, to be part of this small group of pilots and demonstrations. What's the most important thing we can offer you to get you there? But now I want you to think a little bit differently about this one. What would it take? What do you need to get ready to apply to have that seat at the table? We know we need to give you, but if you need to get ready between now and, let's say, the end of Q1 of next year, to kind of get your ducks in a row, to put forward the best kind of application you could, to say, I want to be part of this planning grant process. I want to have a seat at the table. I know what you're going to give me, and it's exactly what I need. But what do you need to get ready for that? And what we're putting on the table is a design workshop that allow you to actually come together and play with ideas and partnerships and just kind of mock up, like I did in those slide decks, but hopefully in a more sophisticated way. Like, these types of partners working with this innovation over this time, and here's how we would implement it. And let's do a few different configurations and see which one's the best fit. So a design workshop where you get time to come in and get in the sandbox with us in a very low risk environment, just come up with ideas. Would it be information on innovations? Like, tell me more about income share agreements. I just heard about them today. They sound intriguing. I need to know a lot more before I go out and start talking about them. Or outcomes-based financing. Another one is access to finance partners. So I can talk about ISAs with you, but maybe you actually want to meet an ISA fund manager. And us being able to facilitate a connection to social finance where you can actually get down to brass tacks and negotiate a deal with them is most important. Like, you want to meet the players because they're going to be really critical to know before you go in to that planning process or even apply for it. Do you need connections to the actual alternative finance players? Next is technical assistance. Do you just need more time and connections and touch points with the experts like Peter Beard? And and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, where you want to be able to go and say, hey, I don't want somebody pitching me on something necessarily. I want to go and actually talk to somebody who knows about these things and who understands my community context and maybe could give me some advice on how to make it work for me or what I should avoid. And then lastly, presentations and resources to socialize and share with your network. What you need is communication support. So when you go back to your community and say, hey, I want to get ready to apply for this RFP, I need to be able to communicate to you what this is all about, and maybe some resources to help share this information would be helpful. Videos, one-pagers, access to us to do a presentation for them, anything like that. But you just need help building, socializing the approach with your community. That would be most helpful. Again, you could choose more than one. You can choose other, but what do you need to get ready to apply should you be interested in applying? Because we know this one's a little bit different, and it's not just about going all in, but you might need a few extra things in place so you go in confident and strong with an application. And again, we know what you're going to need after that point. So let's put 10 seconds on the clock. And let's see the results. All right, design workshop came out on top. Presentation and other resources to socialize talent finance in a solid second, then followed by technical assistance from experts. Interesting that access to finance partners only came in at half, but that could always come as part of the planning process as well. But this is very useful. Oh, I'm sorry, information and innovations, choose from, beat out technical assistance. So we'll make sure we need to, or we know we need to build more of a resource base for you all to actually learn about these innovations so you know what to do with them in the context of a design workshop and how to talk about them back home. So a lot of good information here. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but that was our final polling question. So any other observations from our team? Anything that we learned or anything that challenged our assumptions or confirmed what we suspected?
No, I think to this point, because it's such an unknown area for a lot of folks, that there's going to be probably a lot of technical assistance and other things that we probably need to be more thoughtful about developing. This conversation Joe and I are having is really around, where could this go? But you also need to have some fundamentals to understand kind of how to get there. But so it doesn't surprise me.
All right, I look forward to catching up on that conversation. So what we did want to share with you, and sorry we didn't reserve more time for discussion, that's on me, but we wanted to share with you another opportunity to communicate back to us your interest, and that is a design workshop interest form. This is not to RSVP. What this is an opportunity for you to now say, hey, you just hit me with a bunch of questions, and I had to react to them in real time, but I want to think about it now. And I want to go back and answer those again. And I want to put my name on it. So this is who I am. This is where I'm from. This is how I'm thinking about it, or at least, here's my community context and how I'm thinking about leveraging innovation like this, and with who are my key partners. And now I want to go through and answer those questions again. And here you have the interest form. You can find it on our website at the Talent Finance landing page. We might be able to link to it on the TPM page as well, but you'll definitely find it at the Talent Finance page. And this is open. There's no deadline, but we don't want you to sit on it either. So anything we can get before the holiday would be very helpful to us for planning purposes. And what we want to hear from you is, again, where you're at, how do we meet you where you're at, what you need to be successful going forward with applying for and actually participating in the planning grant process. But there's an additional question at the end that you didn't see in the polling question, which is the format of the design workshop. How do we want to structure the design workshop so it's a best fit for you? Oh, we also want to ask if you plan to participate alone or with other team members, if it should be a team experience or an individual experience. And then how could we best use your time? Do you need more orientation to the Talent Finance Initiative? Do you need presentations from experts and financing partners? Like, let's hear from Social Finance and Midcomb Capital, not just from the chamber. Is it that you need team time? Team time to plan that's facilitated or non-facilitated team time to plan? Just leave us alone, give us a space, we'll come back and report out. Or opportunities for networking and peer sharing and saying, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing in Texas. Well, what's Vermont thinking about? And how does that actually relate to what Michigan might be thinking about doing? Opportunities to talk more amongst each other and to throw bad ideas off each other. A lot of different things to do here, how we can organize it, but we want to make sure we design, if we do this, and we will confirm if we're going to do it as soon as we can with a date, but we want to know if we build it, will they come? Who out there is interested in participating in an extended, and when I say extended, we're not talking a multi-day thing. It's like a longer session, more like a half-day session or longer. And we want to make sure it helps you get the information you need and give you the experience you need so you know more coming out of whether or not to participate in a solicitation process and that you feel like you'll be successful in it in terms of you have all the information you need to move forward with a confident submission. Because we know this is new territory for us. So we're trying to do our best to make sure that we meet the network where it's at and get us all prepared to take this journey together. So that's the interest form. We will be sending out this recording after the meeting. It may take a day or two, but we'll make sure you have a link to the interest form and a reminder to fill it out. We may ping you again in a couple weeks' time just to try to get that information in, because the more we learn before the holidays, the more impactful your commentary and suggestions will be. And we want to make sure that we're inviting you and your partners to this event. And we just need to know how big it's going to be. Is it going to be a small event? Is it going to be medium-sized, large? We want to, of course, come to TPM first. And while this group of peers was able to join us today, we want to make sure your other peers who weren't able to join us also have an opportunity to opt in. And we may start to leverage other networks beyond TPM to make sure they can have a seat at the table as well. So that was the presentation for today. And we only have a few minutes left, but if you have our contact information there's a lot of us. So just pick your poison in terms of who you want to reach out to if you want to continue the dialogue. You got the chamber team, both the talent finance team and the TPM team, and you have our list of wonderful partners and consultants here who are engaging with us on this journey. We encourage you. Talking to any one of them is talking to all of us, as far as I'm concerned. So with the few minutes we have remaining, I would invite any questions or commentary from our participants or from our team for anything I may have missed. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Going once, going twice, and I think we are sold. So thank you all for bearing with us today. Hope we all learned something. I know I learned a lot, and we're excited to kind of bring these two initiatives together in a powerful way that can make a difference not only for your employers, but also the learners and workers in your community. So this is always a fun time of kicking off anything new. It's because it is so new, and the opportunities to learn are great. And while the opportunities to fail are equally as great, that's what makes it exciting. And that's why we always want to come and say, who are the ready and the willing? Who wants to actually get with us in the sandbox and take some risks, knowing that these risks are going to bear a lot of fruit. Even if they're failures, they're going to be vastly important learnings that we can share with the network. But even if we get a little bit of success, it's going to go a long way. And we want to celebrate those who exercise the leadership to kind of go first. So we're looking for that next group of 6 to 12 who will join us in this demonstration. And we're hoping a majority, if not all of them, are made up of our TPM partners and National Learning Network. So think about it, share it with your peers, talk with us more. We're here for you, but we're excited to bring this to TPM. But it's all just words on paper and white papers unless you all grab it and use it as a tool as part of your framework. So we're looking forward to going on this journey with you, and to all of our staff and those who have contributed, both TPM and Talent Finance, thank you. And to our network, thank you as well. You make this work a reality. So with that, we will give you back a few minutes of your time. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.